Hi all and welcome. I'm just about to set up on La Bataille de Albuera, Espagnol. This is another title in the La Bataille series from 1987. You can tell by the fairly distinctive counter style of these cannons from the late 80s. This battle takes place in 1811, and the situation is that the Portuguese and British and their allies have been defending in Portugal against the French, mainly Messina up in the north, behind their line. Messina has really struggled to do anything against this allied force, cannot break through those defensive positions. And so exhausted, he's begun to pull back his army. At the same time, Soult has been ordered by Napoleon to behave more aggressively in the south. And Albuera is, as you can see, Albuera here is located in the southwest of Spain, very close to the Spanish-Portuguese border. Looking at this map, this is north. So we're looking the way we'll normally be looking. We've got north, south, east, and west. And Portugal lies a short march off to the west-northwest. Principally, the main route is along this Camino de Badajoz. And this important border town fortification of Badajoz lies just off the map up the road here to the northwest. Now Soult had secured that and had strengthened it before withdrawing with his forces. And then Wellington, seeing Messina withdraw and weaken the north, had sent his forces to recapture that. And this is happening in early 1811. So they've invested the town, laid siege to it. Soult then responds by gathering another French force and sending it into the area to attempt to recapture, not recapture, but relieve the Allied siege and ensure French control of that very important town and its route into southern Portugal. And this brings us to this situation here. There is a combined... there were, as I should say, combined Allied, Portuguese, and Spanish forces operating in this area. And Beresford was keen to bring these forces together to fight the French, whereas Soult was trying to act aggressively and defeat his opponents before they could merge. Unfortunately, when he brings his forces to the field here at Albuera, they have already combined. You can see here we have mainly Spanish forces out on the left, British in the centre, and Portuguese out on the right. This is Portuguese cavalry out on the right-hand side, King's German Legion defending the fort at Albuera in the centre. And the French come to this battle largely unaware of the forces confronting them. They are keen to drive this Allied force from the battle and march up the road to relieve the siege of Badajoz and again reopen the passage through to Portugal. As a result, the French thought they outnumbered the Allies, but in fact they're outnumbered, I think it's roughly 30,000 Allied troops to about 20,000 French. Now the battle takes place, it starts at about, I think, 8:20 in the morning, and setup has placed the Spanish over here as they were when they responded to the sight of the French. So effectively, the French sought to get around this difficult terrain, this difficult river here, and they marched around here, and they ended up attacking the Spanish and I think there's some British cavalry out here as well, and they attacked them from this sort of southern side whilst also attacking Albuera down the centre. So that's what's going to happen here in this battle. We'll see how the French can navigate this rather difficult terrain, and most importantly, these arroyos, these streams and rivers, which is going to break up. There are special rules regarding crossing of rivers. Of course, artillery has to cross at a bridge or a ford, and the Rio Albuera up here, which is quite a formidable river to cross, much more difficult. So there you have it. We're just about set up. We've got our command situation sorted. Again, I've placed little blue counters on the what I've called effectively the army commanders, but they're separate commands. So we have the British command, we have a small division of cavalry, and their staff are way over here. And then the main Spanish command is placed here and consists of all these forces in this area. The French are much easier. This is a reflection of their command structure. Soult, of course, in command with two. These are. We have Gerard's 5th Corps. We have the cavalry under Le Tour Marbourg. We have Worl's Brigade and Godinot's Brigade, which are two smaller brigades. And Gerard's Corps is divided into two divisions, one under Gerard and one, I think, which is under Gazan. The French bring a lot of artillery and some light cavalry up there, which can be activated. Some more light cavalry under Le Tour Marbourg, which can also be activated, light cavalry activations. And the British, this is the 4th Division under Cole. They, I think, come on as reinforcements pretty early in the battle. All right, that is set up. We're about to start. I'll report back soon and we'll see how things go. All right, just at the end of the first turn, not much happening, just the French really charging out the gates and trying to move towards those Arroyo as quickly as they can. Over to the right, on the north-hand side, of course, we have Godinot's brigade serving as the distraction out on the right, moving towards Albuera. They've also been closely supported by Wells' brigade on the left here. They're moving straight through these olive groves with the option, I guess, to occupy this centre position near the, I think these are brush terrain between the two Arroyo. The main French force out on the left, this is Gerard's 5th Corps. They've split into different division lines and are moving west towards the Arroyo Nogales. Cavalry already beginning to cross at the ford here. In response, the Spanish decide to activate their cavalry and are coming to meet the French to check their advance. Now, I guess the first thing happening here is we're not waiting. The French aren't waiting. They've got this option to wait until 10:20 and then bring their troops on from the southern side of the board here, or they can, from 8:40, which it currently is, move their troops on from any space pretty much on the eastern side of the board. And they're going for that instead. So this, as a result, they may strike the Spanish more towards the east than they did historically. It just presents them with a bit more difficult terrain. There's some slopes along here. These are the brush terrain. Much more difficult to manoeuvre in this space. And I guess also to the north, the British are also activating, and they're moving around Albuera. So we have Cole. This is Stuart's division. This is the 2nd division of the 5th. Who do we have here? This is the 5th, the 6th, and the 7th brigades moving around Albuera. And they'll occupy this space out here and leave it to the Portuguese to occupy the north side of Albuera, with the King's German Legion holding that fort in the centre. And the 4th Division will come on, I think, from the next turn. You can see them over there in the back. That's there under Cole. That's the 11th Brigade under Myers and the 13th Brigade, I think, under Harvey. So that's the situation. It's started off as it has historically, and we'll make modifications as the situation develops and as necessity demands. The French, as I said, they're leading with some of their cavalry, but most of the cavalry is bringing up the rear, which may be a mistake, but yeah, we'll see how things go. I guess this gives them the option to respond to what the Spanish and the English are doing. Alright, so it's currently end of the 8:40 turn. It is 9 o'clock, and this is a situation just southeast of Albuera. Okay, it's now the end of the 9 o'clock turn, so it's 9:20, and things are moving along pretty quickly here. The French decided to activate Bronze 1st Dragoons Division over on the left here. They had an early activation, and they crossed this ford and set up quite quickly their artillery out on this elevated terrain here, overlooking the Arroyo Chicapena, to deter that Spanish cavalry out in the southern flank from harassing them as they try to cross. We had the first shots from this artillery on the Spanish, with the rest of that cavalry just holding that position up on the heights, again deterring the Spanish. Meanwhile, behind them, I had to correct the French movement. I didn't realise they moved. They had increased movement cost to move through olive groves. That rule applies to French and Portuguese regiments. So I've fixed it up, just had to adjust them. Some of these units had to move back a little bit. But they've now all advanced and are crossing this ford here. Elsewhere, the Spanish just kind of reforming their lines a little bit. This is one of the Spanish divisions. It's Ballesteros. They've just reforming the line a bit more to the south, southeast, and also behind the line, Castanos's. I think this is his men. Sorry, this is Español. They've moved there. They were, I think, historically under Blake's command. They were behind the lines here. They've shifted around as well, just in case they try to move through that brush terrain there. We only got to activate one of the British units. This was the 5th Brigade under Colborne out here. They've moved around Albuera, and they've set up behind the Rio Albuera. As on the other side of the river, the French, again, this is just Godinot's brigade, beginning to approach the river and consider where they'll attempt to cross, if at all, indeed. And that was it. Relatively quiet, just more French advancing and considering, I guess at this stage, where and how they'll advance. Alright, it's the end of the 9:20 AM turn, and still just a lot of movement taking place. We do have the first casualty of the battle out here on the left. This artillery managed to eliminate just one of the weak Spanish cavalry units on the far left across the river. Otherwise, the French just moving up. You can see here they're really shifting out to the left. Most of Girard's 5th Corps, French artillery, and Routy, General Routy moving up as well on the left-hand side. I had considered putting them on the right here just to harass the British across the river, but we're really going to try and focus in strength on that left-hand flank against the Spanish. Godinot's men have advanced to the Rio Albuera. They've sent out the Guerre out in front to again harass the French. And again, this is just designed to hold the British. Having said that, the British are responding. They've moved up alongside the river. The Portuguese also activated, and there is a concern, I guess, here that the British and the Portuguese could cross the river. This is why we still have, I think this is Wells Brigade, yep, down here, just in case. I did have also Vares Brigade over on the right here, but they're part of Gerard's 5th Corps, and so I'm going to shift them out to the left here to rejoin with the Corps, and I think they'd be of more value with Gerard under a Corps activation than just sitting out on the right, potentially being inactive for too long. And as I said, so the British have activated, more of them have approached the river here, and then the Portuguese activated as well, using some of Beresford's aides de camp to assist with that. And again, just moving up to the Rio Albuera without doing too much. Alright, so that's the end of the 9:20 AM turn. Alright folks, the end of another turn, the 9:40 AM turn, and just more movement around the board. The French shifting again their forces pretty strongly out there on the left. Now the Spanish in response have withdrawn their cavalry. It was, as I said, they lost 1 unit to artillery in the last turn, and they just didn't want to risk any more. It's not worth it, so they've pulled back to the right hand side, which is the western side of that Spanish line along there. A bit of a traffic jam, a lot of French trying to move through this area. There was a light cavalry activation out on the left which pushed up. But what we decided to do, as you can see here, we're starting to get Gerard's corps to... We're going to try and not push too far to the left, but cross there's 2 fords here. One on the left, one on the right, and make that the focus of our crossing. Now on the right you can see the British and the Portuguese have moved up to the line. French have begun to advance to the Rio Albuera, and again you can see this is Vares, men of the 5th Corps shifting out to the left. Remember I said the plan was for these guys to link up with Gerard to enable that large corps activation. I'm thinking they may hang around this area here and just threaten these Spanish out here on the far left. So a relatively quiet turn, just some more manoeuvring and the French deciding where they'll advance. That's now the end of the 9:40 AM turn, which brings us to 10 AM. Alright, here we are at the end of the 10 o'clock turn, and the battle is just about to start. The French have now, Gerard's corps on the left here, have moved around and begun to threaten those Spanish positions. The Spanish cavalry activated, both of these units activated. These on the right here initially pulled back. They're just going to guard, protect that Spanish right flank. But these folks here under Loy, they decided to threaten this French advance, moved against these French units. They quickly formed square and the cavalry halted. But they're just keeping a check on that French advance, letting them know that they're there, which will force the Spanish to bring up their cavalry, force the French to bring up their cavalry on their left flank. As you can see, most of the French deploying in this area, they're beginning to sort of file out in formation. They've crossed that Arroyo. The artillery is still a long way behind. Again, made the mistake of bringing them up in the rear. We might, the French might sort of deploy, prepare their assault, and then wait for the artillery to set up before they begin to do anything. Over to the right, you can see there the French under, this is got in those men over here on the far right, and I think this is, they were activated. This is Whirlay. Yep, they've been activated, and they're just sort of again moving to this space. Actually begin to move through the scrub here in the centre, just to where the sort of Rio Albuera splits. in this area here. It's also the sort of nexus between the British and the Spanish. The British are beginning to move around here, but this brigade in the world is try and cross this river and test these British defences. Elsewhere, the British 4th Division is still moving on in the background. They're going to move behind Albuera and I guess occupy this position now, and perhaps also be in a position to support the Spanish. I don't know how the Spanish are going to go in combat, so I want to have that 4th Division under Cole close at hand, just in case the Spanish can't hold out against the French. They have a few there's special rules relating to these units. A few pretty weak units, units with low morale, and I just don't know how they'll stand against the power of these French assaults. French artillery also will outnumber the Spanish, so if I can get them into action and correct my earlier error, they could also have a big impact out here in the southwest of Battlefield. Okay, so that's the end of the 10 o'clock turn. I'll report back more shortly. Alright, we are just at the end of the 10:20 AM turn, and it's been a rain turn, so movement has been reduced by a third, and all fire combat is halved in value, but it's largely inconsequential because the French are really just gradually moving up and preparing for this assault on the Spanish positions. As you can see, they've focused almost all their efforts against the Spanish out here on the left. I placed a command activation on one of the French light cavalry formations. The other one rolled for a light cavalry activation, so they were both active. Limited movement, but they were able to threaten the Spanish flank out here, and this Spanish cavalry is not prepared to fight against the French. They have relatively low morale, generally lower strength than the French units, and so they've just decided to pull back instead. I don't think they've pulled back far enough. If the French can get the jump on them in the next turn, they may well assault that Spanish cavalry. We'll see what happens, or charge the Spanish cavalry. Elsewhere throughout here, the French just preparing for their assault on the Spanish positions. You can see the French have pulled out a few skirmishers out here to harass these Spanish raw infantry units. They have very low morale. And behind the lines, the French just still moving up into the area. And you can see they've shifted all their efforts into this left-hand side of the battlefield. Over on the right, nothing much happened. Wells Brigade has moved into here, moving through the scrub. They didn't activate this turn. We had the 7th Brigade here of Abercrombie moving into this gap. 4th Division just moving into the area here. Otherwise pretty quiet out on this right, and it really begs the question whether the Portuguese and the English should cross this Rio Albuera and attack the French out here. 4th Division is certainly going to move to support the Spanish out here on the southwestern flank. They're behind the lines here, and they'll move straight through that open area. So again, just more moving during this turn, but the French are getting close to preparing for their attack. It will come soon. That's the end of the 10:20 turn. Alright, it's the end of the 10:40 AM turn, and we had our first experience of how poorly this Spanish raw infantry perform in combat. Just some fire exchange along the lines here, but this raw infantry only get a ×1 multiplier for their fire effect whilst in line formation. That's the Spanish raw infantry in line. Only I think 3 factors firing out, 3 increments firing out from that position, and then countered by this French air in line with a 3 times multiplier, and there's multiple units firing. They do a lot of damage, and they're already beginning to disorder these Spanish units defending. Yeah, elsewhere along the line, more sort of French cavalry moving up. The Spanish withdrew. The French could have charged out in the far left there. They hesitated just a bit. They have this really strong infantry, cavalry out here, and they didn't want to waste their strong cavalry on this Spanish cavalry. They thought they'd just, I guess, caution in the early hours of the morning. And elsewhere, just more the artillery finally moving up through. 4th Division in the rear moving up. The Spanish did activate and move up to these French Legere units to try and take them on in fire combat. That was probably a mistake in hindsight, given their poor fire performance. I think they're probably better off avoiding combat altogether, or just trying to defend as well as they can and wait for the 4th Division to arrive to help them out. It's really now begging the question of whether the British and the Portuguese should cross the line out here on the right, the Rio Albuera. It's something I'd like to do. It's just getting some activations to enable them to push forward. All right, so that's the end of the 10:40 turn. All right, here we are at the end of the 11 a.m. turn, and the French assault has begun. They're seeing this British 4th Division arriving from the north, and they decided not to wait for the artillery to set up. They needed to get in there and disrupt these Spanish positions before they could be strengthened by the arrival of those British. So, but before that actually happened, over here on the left, we did have the French cavalry out here. We're about to activate, and we had Spanish cavalry activations. The Spanish activation cannon was drawn first, and they decided that they needed to disrupt this French advance. So they launched some charges on the left-hand side of this French infantry of Gerard's corps, and they actually succeeded quite well. They caused a 2-attacker, 2-defender hit on this far left French infantry unit. There was also a morale check required. The French failed that. They were disordered, and they then routed. It was a stroke of Spanish luck, and the cavalry pursued. They were already reduced, and that pursuit eliminated one of those French units. So that was a little bit of luck by the Spanish. They rolled pretty well to force that result, and they brought up some of the rest of their cavalry to support. The French then immediately countered, and seeing this exhausted cavalry, they launched their own countercharge on the Spanish, with generally positive results. They have disordered. The Spanish then countercharged that countercharge, and the Spanish were disordered in those 2 subsequent combats. So a lot of exhausted Spanish cavalry around here. This is a French unit under that exhausted marker, but the Spanish are, I think, all disordered. Sorry. So that, yes, they disrupted the French attack. Yes, they eliminated a French unit, but they've also they're in the thick of the French lines and exhausted, disordered, and in a fair bit of trouble because they're now surrounded by quite healthy French cavalry. After that all took place, the French then launched their assaults on the Spanish infantry lines. Now, they launched an assault mainly this against this raw Spanish infantry. There was an assault launched here and another assault in the centre here, both of which were pretty easy successes. Both Spanish defenders failed their role to stand. One of them was already disordered, and so they routed. The other one failed their role to stand, became disordered, and then suffered on the assault table, and then routed as well. So you can see those Spanish units behind the lines. Elsewhere, we have Wells' brigade moving through the brush again. They are going to try and hit the Spanish on their left flank over here. But the Portuguese are also moving up, and they have decided to cross the Rio Albuera to threaten, well, to do something in this battle. They're sitting out there on this flank, and the French have said, no, we're not going to head out that way. We're going to fight the Spanish. So the Portuguese are saying, well, we want to be in the fight, and they're going to move into this open ground here. Elsewhere, the 4th Division continues to move up, and that's about it. So the fighting has begun out here between the French and the Spanish, and the French are feeling very confident that they can just clear the Spanish from the field. They are not putting up, apart from that one Spanish charge, their infantry is, well, their raw infantry, I should say, is not putting up much of a fight. we get to see how this more experienced and veteran Spanish forces fare in combat, and they do have a bit of an advantage out there, so they may perform better in the coming turns. That's the end of the 11 a.m. turn. All right, here we are at the end of the 11:20 a.m. turn, and it was a pretty good turn for the French. As you can see on the left here, they focus on cavalry activations. They activated 2 separate cavalry units, and a third received a light cavalry activation. And they fortunately received these activations pretty early in the turn, and they were able to catch the Spanish cavalry before they could pull back. And they didn't eliminate them, but they routed. You can see behind the lines here, all that Spanish cavalry didn't stand a chance. Just they're small units. You can see here 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 versus the much stronger French cavalry units, and they have lower morale as well. Not that really played a factor. It was more French numerical superiority against these already disordered Spanish units. So that's all that happened, really. Just a lot of French activations out here. The Spanish, I had placed a Spanish cavalry activation marker, but they didn't get a chance to activate. They were routed very quickly. And elsewhere, just some shuffling of units, small French cavalry moving up in the rear. And Beresford's sort of his command is shifting over to help the Spanish. And that's about all that happened that turn. Yeah, just a lot of French cavalry action. You can see them pushing way up on that left-hand side. All right, that's it to the end of the 11:20 a.m. turn. All right, we're now at the end of the 11:40 turn, and things are just going from bad to worse for the Spanish. They just cannot hold their positions. This raw infantry down the bottom here in particular is just so weak. They fire with one basically strength point. They melee with 1 point per increment. So these units down here, this raw infantry at strength 4, there was one here is strength 3. They defend at a strength of 3. Each increment is only worth 1 melee point versus the sort of 8 for the French. Each increment is worth 2 melee points, strength points when meleeing. So they can't fire, they can't melee, and they have terrible morale. So the French are just launching assaults all up and down the line and causing, again, more rout. I haven't actually moved these units yet, but I'll do that in a moment. More routs and destruction of the Spanish infantry. We had one unit here surrender. This is the last roll, actually, when the French rolled 66 for their assault roll. Elsewhere, up in the north here, it was interesting. So the French launched some assaults down along here and began to move through the centre here, and the Spanish thought that they would try to hit the French, and they did have some success. You can see here 2 routed French units. The Spanish hit the line along here. Well, they had some success. They also had some failures. Some of these routed units were from their assaults along here. These are the better Spanish, the regular Spanish infantry. They do get morale bonuses. I guess what they're trying to do here is slow down the French, stop their assaults, and wait for the 4th Division to come up. What's hurting all of this is the weather. It's been foggy and rainy for several hours. I keep rolling fog and or rain. Not the really bad torrential rain, just enough to slow down movement, such that the 4th Division is plodding through the rain and the mud and taking a long time to get up to help the Spanish. We also have, I think this is Wells Brigade. Yeah, Wells Brigade has now crossed the Arroyo Chicapiana and are about to strike the Spanish left flank. The British are also suffering from command problems. I haven't been able to... So I sent out Beresford's aides de camp to activate the Portuguese a few turns ago, and they're still making their way back so they can be sent out again to activate. I was trying to keep Beresford close to this 4th Division so that he could continue to activate them as a corps. I'd really like to get the Portuguese moving south to help hit the French down here. Meanwhile, the British just along the line here, holding that river, doing nothing. The Arroyo, doing nothing. And also Spanish cavalry have pulled back behind this little part of the Arroyo de Valdesevilla. So things not going well for the Spanish. They are just cannon fodder, roadblocks in the way of this, very weak roadblocks in the way of this French advance. They just cannot put up a fight, and the French are feeling pretty good about the focus of their attacks. I think they've made the right decision here to shift out to the southwest and hit the Spanish instead of the British. All right, so again, I'll do some retreats, but that's the end of the 11:40 a.m. turn. We're just on midday. It's now the end of the 12 o'clock turn, and the French have been launching assaults throughout their line. And the Spanish raw infantry just has not been able to put up any fight at all. You can see a big group of routed Spanish infantry units behind the line. Most of those are those raw infantry, but there are a few of the regular Spanish infantry as well. They have had, the Spanish have had a few small successes, another routed French unit out on the left, and there have been a few small places where they've been able to hold their ground. You can see out on the left, the French right, the Spanish left. They're doing pretty well to hold. They withstood some assaults here and disordered some of these French. This unit here held its ground, and another unit out there. But all along the front here, most of the French assaults were pretty successful. So the French pushing very hard, and behind the lines, the British 4th Division has arrived, and I've just bumped them a little bit, but they have begun to form up behind the lines, but they're not as strong as I kind of had hoped. The speed at which the Spanish raw infantry has deteriorated and fled the field has got me a bit worried that the 4th Division may not be enough, and I think I'm certainly going to have to bring in some of the 2nd Division troops from along the Rio Albuera. The Portuguese have begun to cross the river and are finding some fords, but it's they've got a long way to go, and it's hard to activate them. This is really just a distraction. I thought I'd see if they could hit the French elsewhere. The Portuguese moving to join up with the 4th Division. It's too hard to activate them out there. So Beresford is moving with the 4th Division to keep them activated as an entire division, and it's too hard to activate the Portuguese out on the right. Very soon, I think I'm going to have to start pulling some of these British away from the Rio Albuera to help out on the sort of allied right flank. The French, have not set up their artillery yet. Again, made the mistake of pulling them at the back of the lines. It's considerable artillery, and if they can get them set up somewhere, they'd be very effective. It's just a case of when and where. Maybe it would have been better to set them up along the Rio Albuera and just to harass those British, as I think they did historically. But anyway, that's all this French artillery in the centre here. French cavalry still very fresh. I don't think they've suffered any casualties at all. They've been exhausted and disordered, and they've all recovered, but don't think they've suffered any hits throughout those lines. So that's the situation. That's the end of the 12 o'clock turn. The French hitting very hard against those Spanish lines, and the Spanish simply unable to put up much of a fight. All right, it's the end of the 12:20 turn, but a very quiet turn. Not much happened. We had torrential rain throughout the turn, so there was no fire, there were no cavalry charges, and movement was 1/3, I think, of normal. So there's not much that can really happen. No fire in the middle here. The French decided to use this opportunity just to pull back and regroup, try to recover order, which I haven't rolled for yet. that'll happen in a moment. And I haven't done the routes at the back here of the Spanish. But what's happening is more 4th Division, British 4th Division troops are moving up. You can see they deployed here last turn in the middle. Portuguese moving out on the right. The Spanish holding pretty well here. Again, nothing happened here. The British are pulling back from the Rio Albuera. And you can see part of the 2nd Division there is going to shift around as the Portuguese very slowly cross the Rio Albuera down there in the northeast. That was about it. Very quiet turn. Again, more of those Portuguese cavalry and infantry shifting out behind Albuera to the west. But mostly a quite inactive, rain-soaked turn. Okay, the end of the 12:40 PM turn, and the French are taking a cautious approach here, reorganising their lines and moving up their artillery. I think we might set up this artillery first before we begin to launch an assault on those slightly stronger Spanish lines, now joined by members of the 4th Division there. There were a few assaults out on the right, but for the first time, I think some of these Spanish raw infantry held their ground. Yes, they were disordered, but they stopped the attackers and managed to disorder some of those as well. That was just one unit. Elsewhere, a bit of a mess behind the lines. These are some of the recovered units making their way back to the front. More 4th Division around here, and these British, as I said, are beginning to move around. This is 2nd Division British trying to help out in this area, as the French haven't moved at all out here in the east. A few good recovery rolls from the Spanish out in the background there. Some of those routed units rolling very well to recover, and they'll gradually make their way back to the fight. There was more French cavalry action out here. They've crossed that Arroyo de Valdesevilla and are threatening the far right of the Spanish line, that Spanish cavalry out there. So there you go. Pretty quiet turn. There was fog this turn, so the rains have ceased and movement is back to normal again. But the French, as I said, just playing cautiously and getting their lines prepared, recovering order mainly in a lot of their units around here, so they can launch some strong assaults on that renewed Spanish-British line. So this brings us to, it's just about 1 p.m. Okay, it's the end of the 1 o'clock turn, and the French advance rolls on. Out on the left here, this group of cavalry here activated and drove the Spanish cavalry completely from the field. They routed and they're way off in the distance over in the north. The French artillery have now set up here, and they're causing some heavy losses against the Spanish here. There's a couple of French assaults just to drive the British skirmishers away, and some more assaults down here to drive the last of those Spanish raw infantry out of the area. So the French are very enthusiastic and optimistic about their chances here, doing very well, continue to drive their infantry. This is the infantry that has rallied earlier. The British continue to shift around into this area, and there are some sort of recovered units making their way back to the field. But you can see behind the lines here, there's a lot of bits and bobs, disordered, sort of recovered units gradually kind of making their way very slowly back to the fighting. But the French are in a pretty good position here. They're in good order, advancing carefully, and as I said, feeling optimistic about their chances during this series of assaults. That's the end of the 1 o'clock turn. Okay, it's the end of the 1:20 p.m. turn, and the French offensive continues to roll on. They've got their artillery slowly moving forward and just causing a lot of damage against this Spanish, with a bit of English out here in the southwest. that's really all that's happening. It was a rain turn, so fog, so relatively quiet. Gerard's corps activated out here on the left. The Portuguese are slowly moving up, so the French are here on the right. Have sort of shifted their line a bit around to the north to face them. This is Godinot's brigade. But behind the lines, it's a bit of a mess. You've got some of these Portuguese here moving around behind the Spanish lines. There are some of these recovered Spanish units making their way back to the front. You've got some units from 4th Division kind of trying to set up behind the Spanish and English lines. The French have created a bit of a gap out here. This is where some of the Spanish were, and a few assaults this turn cleared them out. And then you've got some of these 2nd Division men here. This is, I think, Horton's brigade, the 6th Brigade. Yeah, around here. This is Abercrombie's brigade. They will probably have to shift around to face the south. And it's threatening these English positions along the Rio Albuera. So none of this is looking good for the English, Spanish, Portuguese. Having said all that, the French are looking rather weak in places. I think I saw one of these units was down to 1 strength. It's hard to pick up. Yeah, 1 strength there. These guys are still at full strength. What have we got around here? 2 strengths, so they're half strength, or 2/3 strength rather. So there are a few reduced French units. But again, with this big battery in the centre and all those Spanish routed units behind the line, I don't know how the English, Portuguese, Spanish are going to turn this battle around. Time will tell. Okay, it's the end of the 1:40 p.m. turn, so we're just at 2 o'clock, and this is yet another rain turn. And all of these weather conditions, these weather effects, they halve fire combat, they halve artillery fire, they reduce movement values. This all mostly penalises, I think, the British. The French have just been assaulting up and down the line. Even with these halved artillery values, they're rolling very well. They eliminated a unit here. I think they caused 2 hits here, despite the halved values. They caused another hit out here. This is, artillery close range, halved value, just rolling very well. The French assaulted out here on the right and routed that Spanish unit here, who should rout again. But you can see here the British are now setting up. There's a little bit of a valley here, and they've set up on the north side of that little, not quite a valley, a little depression. You can see the elevated terrain here. So some British skirmishers out the front trying to slow down these French assaults. Looking pretty well. Strong, full strength British units. My concern is there isn't much behind them. Some Portuguese here, and a lot of Spanish stragglers behind the line. But I really think this will be the last line of defence. These British here, yes, they do have some fort behind them, but they don't want to have to rely on that. The Spanish are recovering well behind the lines, although routing a long way away from the battle. You can see in the background there some recovered Spanish cavalry. So this is, I guess the French are about to hit the British and see how their assaults go against these much stronger British lines. Their artillery, as I said again, just doing a lot of work. I think as much as possible, I'd like to keep bringing that artillery up and get them to hurt the British before I need to send my infantry in. It's now 2 o'clock. I think the weather is clearing up. Yeah, it's going to take another hour or so before it clears up. Hopefully, we'll probably have less rain this turn, this coming hour. We'll see what happens, how the weather affects play. All right. Okay, it's the end of the 2 o'clock turn, and a lot of cavalry activity this turn, way out here on the western flank. The French went first, and they activated first, and they crossed around here, tried to charge the British cavalry who were based around here. They had some success, routed some of the British units who are, I think, off in the distance. Also routed one remaining Spanish unit that was here. I think the French then activated second as well with this other group of cavalry, and they moved up around, I think, to try and finish off what was left of the British at that point. The Portuguese then responded, and they came charging in to charge the exhausted French cavalry, and they had some marginal success. A lot of bounces throughout here. I think the French have a slight upper hand, mainly because they have more cavalry in the area, but the arrival of the Portuguese means that they don't quite control out this western side of that Arroyo, and British cavalry still in the region, so holding out and protecting that western flank of the Allied force. The Spanish assaulting here routed another Spanish unit as expected, but we had our first taste of a French assault on the British lines, and the French failed in their assault. The British held firm, as you can see here. One French battalion routed, the other disrupted. What else is happening? That was it, just mainly out here in the southwest, west. French artillery still doing a lot of damage. And that's it. So British down here, just shifting their line around to face the south, just behind that little stream there. So they've got a pretty good defensive position here to confront the French when they come, probably in the next turn or two. That's the end of the 2 o'clock turn, so it's now 2:20 p.m. All right, it's the end of the 2:20 p.m. turn. This is a pretty quiet turn. The French activated some of their cavalry out in the far left here just to move up on the left and join this engagement taking place out here. The French also attempted Gerard's Corps, activated, moved up a little. They tried one assault on the Portuguese out here in the far left, which failed terribly. Portuguese standing their ground quite strong, and the French routed behind the lines. Elsewhere, it was pretty quiet. More French artillery doing damage, which is kind of what they're hoping to do before their infantry move in. And there's only one Spanish activation. I think they moved some cavalry up. And the Portuguese, that was what happened out here. The British sent their activation to the Portuguese, who moved up to the far right of their line. And that's about it. It was a pretty quiet turn. More Spanish raw infantry have left the field now, so they won't make their way back on. Portuguese are now pretty well set up in the bottom here, and they're about to move against the French out here on the far right. But that's about it. A pretty quiet turn for the 2:20 turn. It's now just on 2:40 p.m. It's the end of the 2:40 p.m. turn, and this is a clear, actually it was cloudy, a cloudy turn, but there was no effect on movement or fire. Nonetheless, it was a pretty quiet turn. There was no cavalry activity out in the far west. Very quiet, actually. We had World's infantry down here setting up. We had Vare's grenadiers pushing back the British skirmishers in front of the line here, and we had the Portuguese assault the French down in the east down the bottom here with some success. They routed one French battalion and disrupted the other, which was quite unexpected. I thought the French would be able to send up to the Portuguese, but they didn't. That was about it. Now, behind the lines, as I said earlier, the Spanish have made their way back after routing fairly earlier, and they're beginning to reform. So they've got a lot of depth behind the lines here. You've got the British in the front here, 4th Division, 2nd Division out on the left here, some Portuguese behind the lines, and yeah, the Spanish started to make their way just to back up those lines. So although the French had some early success, they've really slowed down their assault. So I don't think Gerard activated this turn. Instead, he's having much success with his artillery. The French artillery here has eliminated another British unit, and they're happy with that. No point risking the infantry in assaults if the artillery at such close range can do so much damage. Ideally, the British would like to pull back from here. They don't really want... This is open ground here. You can see pretty flat terrain. The British don't want to be sitting here in front of this French artillery. But what other choice do they have? They could pull back, but then the artillery could just follow them up. It's a very strong battery along here. It does about 50 strength points of artillery fire. Now it's clear weather. They're firing at full strength. So the weather has really just worked against the British. When they wanted to fire, it was cloudy, and now they don't want the French to fire, and it's cleared up. So yeah, that's the end of the 2:40 p.m. turn. The French assault has slowed down, but they continue to hurt the Allied positions with a number of their artillery, their guns that are set up along the centre west of this line. There we go. It's now the end of the 3 p.m. turn, and there was a little bit more activity this turn. Again, the Portuguese down in the east over here had an early activation, the first activation actually, and they launched a series of assaults against those French lines, which were of mixed success. You can see a lot of disordered French units here, but also the Portuguese getting worn down as a result. But certainly they forced them back away from the bridge near Albuera. I also activated the King's German Legion, and they were about to cross the river, but they had late activation. And the French, in the meantime, launched some assaults against the British 2nd Division lines around here. And so the King's German Legion here just decided they would hold in this area in case those French assaults were successful. So they didn't cross the river, they've just held behind that 2nd Division British infantry here. As it turns out, the French assaults were pretty successful. They eliminated some artillery here, but were held up here by the strong British lines. And elsewhere, just really an exchange of fire combat. Again, that French artillery doing a lot of damage. But yeah, the British are causing some losses in exchange in certain places. There's a couple of French routed units behind the lines and down the south here, in the east here. But again, no cavalry activity. The Spanish had 2 activations, and they've organised some of their men behind the lines. These are the regrouped units. So they are there, they are available. Again, not going to place much faith in them, but they are available if needed. Okay, so that's the end of the 3 p.m. turn. Clear weather now. It's now the end of the 3:20 p.m. turn, and a mixed situation along the line. Out in the far left here, the French have relaunched their attacks and had a series of assaults against some Portuguese that were out here. The assaults went very well and forced the Portuguese back. You can see some routed units behind the lines out in the north. Artillery still doing a lot of damage against these British who just haven't been activated to pull back. I've been active elsewhere with the limited British Allied activations and haven't pulled these units out of the line, which I should have done. Pretty quiet along here, just an exchange of fire combat causing mainly some French casualties among the grenadiers who should not be sitting here taking this British fire. And down the south, the Portuguese activated and launched some assaults against the French, which again went pretty well. I think there's one increment left in this unit, forcing the retreat of some more French here. And the Portuguese managing to rally pretty well, recovering from disorder. So there you go, the French trying to attack on the left and the west, but being attacked themselves by the Portuguese out in the east. Elsewhere, you can see the Spanish now back into the front lines. And that's about it. So the end of the 3:20 p.m. turn, with a lot of back and forth, I guess, along the line. There we go. It's now the end of the 3:40 p.m. turn, so just on 4 o'clock when there are some rule changes. But this turn, the Portuguese really cleared the French out of the southern area. They've been doing really well with their assaults. A couple of routed French units down here in the east, and the Portuguese really pushing them away from that Rio Albuera. Slightly around here, some effective British fire has also eliminated Grenadiers unit, as the French also cleared out this area here, eliminating some British units. And they've pushed forward and actually, I think, routed a Portuguese unit out on the left. And they've pushed forward and getting ready for a new series of assaults. Those French guns are really being highly effective against the Allied lines. There have been a few cavalry skirmishes out on the left here the last couple of turns. And the French, you can see, just pushing that Allied cavalry back away from the lines, clearing the way forward for the infantry. Now, at the end of turn morale check, things are still okay. I mean, the Spanish have been hurt badly. British have lost 3 units, but the French have lost 1, 2, 3. They're okay, 3 or 4. But there are no morale drops yet for the French, Portuguese, or British, so things still going okay. So that's the situation at the end of the 3:40 p.m. turn, just on 4 o'clock now. Okay, it's the end of the 4 p.m. turn, and the fatigue rules are now in effect. This means that manoeuvre unit counters that are placed can potentially be cancelled. And we just had the one cancellation, and it was up the top here with some French cavalry, which is understandable. They've been very active over the past few hours, back and forth, exhausted. So they didn't activate this turn. Instead, we had Gerard activate up here, and he launched a few assaults on the British lines, only having one success against the Spanish, who have only just re-entered the line. But the Portuguese out here in the west were successful in holding their ground. Elsewhere, the Portuguese assaulted the French down here out in the east, but they were held up. The Portuguese are doing pretty well. They're bringing weight of numbers against the French and have had some pretty good success. Fortunately, this turn the French had an early activation and were able to sort of get into line defensive formation, unusual for the French. Just thought we'd try to slow down the Portuguese out here. Otherwise, once again, the familiar story, the French artillery doing a lot of damage in the centre, some Spanish reorganising behind the lines. Again, this I think it's the 3rd Division, back into order, and that's about it. So it's now 4:20 p.m. It's now the end of the 4:20 p.m. turn, and there are actually a series of assaults all along the line this turn. The cavalry was pretty quiet. We had some French assaults here, which has cleared away the Portuguese from this far western side and really opened up this area. The French are really pushing hard on their far left flank here. You've got the Spanish units here, Spanish units behind them, some Portuguese mixed in as well. This is really exploiting the weak part of the Allied line. Artillery, again, the familiar story, hammering away at these Allied lines. Gerard also sent some men around to the right here against the British and Portuguese, I think. Actually, they may be Spanish, with not quite forcing the ground, but causing some disorder among the defenders. All quiet, mostly around here, just an exchange of fire. And out here, the Portuguese activated early and attempted to assault the French around here. They did have one successful assault here, which routed the French defenders, but the French then counter-attacked on the left side of this area. I've forgotten this guy's name. This has got to know. So he counterattacked on the left, but his counterattacks didn't go all that well. The Portuguese are putting up a really good fight. They've got relatively low morale, around 34, 35 out here, but some pretty strong units, some 6s, some 7s. I mean, they fire poorly. They don't assault all that well. It is just a case, the familiar story of the attackers having the advantage, being able to pick the weak parts of the defensive line to attack, and that's been, I guess, really the story out here of the Portuguese success. They've picked off the weak, isolated French defenders as of it being able to advance before the French could get into order. This French counterattack was, I guess, premised on a similar idea that the French would try and regain the initiative in this area, but, well, the Portuguese got lucky, and the French weren't able to do so. So now it's really going to, I think, coming down to a couple of turns of a bit of a fire exchange between the two. Some of these French units have regrouped from way earlier, the initial French assault. They've got reasonably decent morale, and although very heavily reduced, some of them, and they're returning to the line. All right, so that's the end of the 4:20 p.m. turn, just on 4:40 p.m. now. It's now the end of the 4:40 p.m. turn, and another series of pretty strong assaults around the lines. The French again pushing hard out here on the left, and once again they've cleared the Spanish from the field. The Spanish, who had regrouped and formed up behind the line, came under attack by the French, and just their morale is atrocious, and they cannot stand against these French attacks. So the French have now been assaulting here for a while with artillery support, and they've really reduced this western side of the Allied line. There isn't much out here. You can see these are the Spanish commanders behind the lines. This is the remnants of, I think, the Portuguese artillery. There is a Spanish unit there as well. Portuguese, out on the left. And this is where the British part of the line starts, around here. And the French have just been avoiding this area of the line. Pepin, seeing this gap opening, has started to shift his division into this area. You can see them grouping around here near the artillery, looking to exploit this western side of the British line. Again, more fire exchange along here without too much happening. The Grenadiers certainly suffering most of the casualties in that exchange against the British in line. Out here, another series of assaults by the Portuguese, which routed another French unit, and they're rallying pretty well. Again, they've got pretty poor morale. It's around 34, 35, or 33 for that one, but it just happened to be rolling pretty well for their recovery, and they're able to re-enter the fighting pretty quickly. However, Portuguese losses elsewhere mean that, this is in the 4th Division, bring the Portuguese to morale level 1, which gives them a +5 morale modifier. They suffer as a result of that. So what's happening out here on the far left with these Portuguese in the 4th Division, their losses, I think, affects what's happening way out here. Okay, so that's the situation. I should say yes, the French have punched a nice hole here, but they are, A, quite disordered around this area, and B, some of them are very much reduced in strength. 2 steps, 2 increments there. It's hard to get that bottom one. I think they're down to 1. So 2 on top, 1 there. What's this one? That's 3. They're okay. But they have suffered a lot of losses throughout their units. Just an interesting little side story here. Behind the lines here, this is a Spanish Guard. They've put up a remarkable fight. They've been fighting out here since the early hours. And they kind of got caught up. This is part of Gerard's corps. They got caught behind as the Spanish routed. These guys have very good morale. I think it's 31, not great, but they've just withstood a lot of French fire, and the French units have just been firing exchanged for a long time without much happening. They've just held up these French units. These French units have not suffered any casualties in all this time, remarkably, and it's taken them a long time just to whittle down those remnants of the Spanish force. And again, no cavalry action this turn. Again, fatigue having its effect out here with Latour Malberg's reserve cavalry. I tried to activate them, but again, the rules around tidiness removed that marker. And so nothing happened out there north of the Arroyo. All right, so that's the end of the 4 o'clock turn. We're heading into the that was the end of the 4:40 p.m. turn. We're heading into 5 o'clock now, so it's getting quite late around Albuera. All right, we're just at the end of the 5 o'clock turn. Actually, at the start of the 5:20 turn, I've just had a few small activations at the start of this 5:20 turn. You can see the activation markers all throughout there. In the 5 o'clock turn, Gerard tried to activate in the centre here, but his men suffered from fatigue, and so his activation marker was removed. This meant that it was pretty quiet. There was no cavalry action out in the west, so you can see already at the start of this 5:20 turn there are a number of French activations. In fact, they've already activated one of the first markets. So all throughout the centre here, it was pretty quiet. Spanish just shifting out to the west to try to hold off Gerard's corps. Most of the action took place down here in the east, with both the French and the Portuguese activating and engaging in a series of assaults and counter-assaults throughout this area. It's getting very messy here. Portuguese had the upper hand, but the French have now returned to order, and their superior morale and melee ability is starting to show. And they're starting to, I think, shift, well, at least balance the situation here, if not start to push it a bit more in their favour. Again, Portuguese doing very well, but I don't think they're going to force anything decisive out here. This is starting to just grind down into a bit of a stalemate. So that's the situation. That's it at the end of, as I said, the 5 o'clock turn. I'm now just at the start of the 5:20 turn. I've had just a couple of activations, and I'll report back soon on how that goes. Okay, it's into the 5:20 p.m. turn, and a lot of cavalry action out in the west, with the French really just putting a lot of effort into clearing this area west of that, Arroyo Val de Sevilla. Not a lot of success, I guess. They did force back some of the cavalry, but you still got some fairly strong allied units remaining. The French are now, Gerard focused his efforts around this area with a series of assaults, but they all failed, disrupting, I think, some Spanish here, but also heavy disorder in those attacks. Pippin just making his way back to the lines. He routed with one of his units, and down south, just again more exchange of fire throughout this area here, with no, as I said earlier, no real decision being made either way. So apart from that heavy cavalry action and that one assault up the top, it was a pretty quiet turn. Even the French artillery was quiet. They didn't do any damage this turn at all, I think. So that's the end of the 5:20 p.m. turn. Okay, it's the end of the 5:40 p.m. turn. We're just on 6 p.m. and this was a very interesting turn because of what happened down here near Albuera. Now, the English just decided to attack the French lines. It wasn't planned, it was just a bit of on a whim, but with basically what's happening is Gerard's corps up here is heavily disordered, and they failed to recover a lot of that disorder at the end of this turn. But at the start of this turn, being heavily disordered, with Pepin making his way back to the lines over here, the British decided to attack the French down here under this is Wells Brigade, and hit their skirmishers around this area here. I think they hit a grenadier unit here, and then some French infantry in column in this area here. Completely unexpected. I think we sent 2 brigades of the British into that attack of the 2nd Division. We brought up the King's German Legion in behind. They're getting ready to join the fight, but you can see here the damage that they've done. They routed 2 French units that were here, destroyed the grenadiers, forced the skirmishers back in some areas, but it's taken the pressure off the defence in the north. Further north, you can see the Spanish are attempting to defend again the formed line. The problem here is that now this part of the 2nd British Division, 6th Brigade, is in line of fire of these French guns, and as we've seen throughout the afternoon, that's not a good place to be. And this is sort of encouraging the British to counterattack. Only 1 unit disordered as a result of the assault, which gives us the opportunity to continue to push with that advance. The other problem, the other motivation for the British to attack is that the French cavalry up in the north here, up in the west, has really cleared out that area over the past turn or two, and that presents a threat just to that whole Allied right flank. Spanish holding the right flank, they're not going to hold for long, and so I'm thinking the British will just keep attacking the French, and if their cavalry are going to come in from the west, they'll stop their infantry being able to do anything in the centre and in the east. So there you go. That's the end of the 5:40 p.m. turn. Here we are at the end of the 6 p.m. turn, and the English have 2nd Division have continued their assault on the French lines around here, really forcing back and in some cases routing and eliminating some of the battalions of Wells Brigade. In response, what you see here is this is Pepin's division, the 2nd Division of Gerard's corps. They've had to remember earlier they had sort of shifted in here hoping to strike in the west side of the Allied lines, but they've now drawn their line out to the east to cover this gap and really successfully, I think I can say, stop the British. So the British, that little sortie over the last 40 minutes or so, has forced the French line back well away from Albuera. The French were placed along here, and they were just really holding this area as Gerard's corps were activating in the north. But what's happened here is Wells Brigade has scattered. You can see some of the skirmishing units here. This is well here. He has a few routed units behind the line. He has lost 2 units, I think, 2 battalions in a series of assaults, and it's just opened up that gap. That's not to mention the impact on Vare's grenadiers around here. There are now only 2 very weak grenadier battalions left, 2 increments in total. And they're being harassed by the skirmishers, those British skirmishers. So, look, I don't think the British can continue with this push, but certainly it has checked the French advance and has forced Durat's corps to really stretch out. Having said that, this artillery, not much, but it's doing a lot of damage. We've now got the Spanish in the firing line over here in the west. That was about it. There were no cavalry activations this turn, just strong British movement against those French lines, pushing them away from Albuera. Now, however, the British 5th and 7th Brigades are a bit scattered, and their main concern now is recovering order and making sure the French don't then renew their attack against Albuera. Okay, so we're just at the end of the 6 o'clock turn. It is 6:20. We'll see how things go. Here we are at the end of the 6:20 p.m. turn, and the French have really counterattacked. Their cavalry has really led the way around here. Two separate groups have crossed that Arroyo de Valdesevilla and are causing havoc among these low morale Spanish units. You may recall there was a decent Spanish line here. It no longer exists. There are a few Spanish battalions that managed to form square, some Portuguese up here, but the Spanish really, the French really pushing hard into these Allied lines, and behind the lines here, they're really even picking off a few of these routed Spanish units just to stop them coming back into the fight. And unfortunately, as I said earlier, they've pushed this Allied cavalry away, and they're not in a position or within range to respond. The infantry is also getting involved, so there was a disordered, I think, Portuguese or maybe Spanish unit here that the French charged, following up more with some fresh infantry. These guys are very slow to recover from disorder, but they'll be getting involved in a moment. Artillery doing some damage again this turn, which is good for the French. And down here, this is Pepin's men forcing the British skirmishers back. So, the French very quickly regaining control of the situation and renewing their offensive against Albuera. Now it's end of the 6:20 turn, so it's around 6:40. But with this French cavalry now within roughly a kilometre or so of Albuera and threatening the flanks of the British lines here, I think it's going to be tough for the British to hold out. They're going to face some tough decisions to either pull back to Albuera, try and get their cavalry involved. They really can't hit the French now that Pepin and Durat have very quickly reorganised their men. All right, and the French and the Portuguese continuing to hit at each other. I guess a mutual exchange this turn. And some British skirmishers eliminated a French battalion, but the French also eliminated some Portuguese. All right, so there we are. Okay, it's the end of the 6:40 p.m. turn, and this final French push on Albuera is gaining momentum. Gerard activated his corps, really just the western half around this area, and again launched a series of assaults, driving hard through the centre here to clear out a few of those Spanish squares that had formed. Some good resistance here by, I think, some Portuguese and maybe a Spanish there. More French cavalry crossing the Arroyo out in the west. And a panic has spread throughout the Allied lines. You can see the British 4th Division have really just pulled back in tight around Albuera. King's German Legion has quickly shifted out to the far right, and they're just trying to form a very tight defensive circle around Albuera. But the way things are going, it won't stand for too much longer. This Spanish square here is down to 1 increment. These are pretty full strength men in Gerard's division. These are the guys who were caught up behind the line in that fire exchange with the Spanish Guard. And they had the upper hand in that. It just took a long time to wear them down. But as a result, they're mostly full strength. I think they've just taken one hit. Yeah, but a 6 there. Some of these guys behind the lines are very reduced. Down to 3. Not too bad. The point is they can still maintain that momentum and continue the advance. Now this cavalry has actually a very interesting thing happened. This is actually Spanish hussars. They came in an almost suicidal attempt just to slow down the French. They are outnumbered. There's only 3 increments here, and they're outnumbered. This is a unit they routed at full strength. What have we got here? Spanish dragoons, and they rolled 66 on the assault table to rout that already disordered French dragoon unit. So, yeah, Spanish in amongst the French there, just trying to slow them down. So here we have what will be maybe the final British stand around Albuera. Who knows? They may be able to hold out against combined French infantry and cavalry. We'll find out soon enough, because that cavalry is very close, as is the French infantry. Just the combination of the infantry and the cavalry working together against the squares and so forth is very effective. And the artillery not too far away, they've slowly been pushing up each turn. Alright, so that's the end of the 6:40 PM turn. We're now just on 7 PM around Albuera. Alright, here we are at the end of the 7 o'clock turn, and the British really pulled their lines in around Albuera, but in doing so, they've really realised they don't have much of a line left to pull in. Withdrawing the line has left some Spanish and Portuguese out here. There were some Spanish squares which have been, they were here, attacked by the French and either eliminated or routed. And then there was a French charge here on a British unit, and the British failed to stand their ground, which leaves just the remnants of the 2nd and 4th Division with the King's German Legion here. So this British, when collapse starts, it accelerates pretty quickly. So it's now, as I said, the end of the 7 o'clock turn, 7:20. I guess the one thing in British favour is that the French lines are a bit disorganised at the moment. You've got Gerard up here, still with some good, strong battalions. Pepin way back over here. Vares, Grenadiers, not much left there. Wells Brigade scattered around here, and and the French down here engaged with the Portuguese, which has been going on for quite some time. I guess the main French advantage is the cavalry, which is in good condition up the top there. So that's the end of the 7 o'clock turn. It's just on 7:20. We'll report back soon. Right, here we are, at the end of the 7:20 PM turn, just on 7:40, and the French are pushing in on those Allied, mainly British defences around Albuera. Gerard's division striking around from the west here, hitting the part of the 2nd Division, British division, along the top here, while Pepin's division drives more from the south, and they're hitting, again, that other part of the 2nd Division in this southern part of Albuera, forcing a rout up here and some disorder among those other British units. Not much left of the British, not much left to put up a fight, and this is before the French cavalry did activate over here just to pick off some of those routed British units to make sure they don't return to the fight. But as you can see, not much left of the British here. They're trying to, some of this French cavalry has swung around the south here and have threatened the British lines, and then the infantry move in and finish off the British. There isn't long to go. It is certainly leaning very heavily towards the French at this stage. We'll see how it goes. Alright, the end of the 7:40 PM turn. We're just on 8 PM and the British pull back even tighter. The French, this time, Durand's men suffered from fatigue, so they lost their activation marker. It was left up to Pipin's division around here, but they only launched one assault around here. The British failed their role to stand, were already sorted, and so routed. That was it. It was a pretty quiet turn with that lost activation and the British just pulling back their line around here. Okay, so end of the hour morale check. The French are actually now on morale level 1. The British are on morale level 1 as well. So we're going to see some more failures to close and to stand. That's just my dog Tammy. Okay, so that's the end of the 7:40 turn. It's now on 8 o'clock. Okay, end of the 8 o'clock turn. Most of the British now inside Albuera. Some more French assault this turn. Just cleared out this area around here. Not much left of the British, and with I guess only a minor morale penalty, but just persistent assaults by the French, assault after assault, turn after turn, which they just, the British can't do much to withstand that many assaults. Alright, we're going to keep fighting it out, but yeah, not many British left. This is really all that's left of that army. Okay. Alright, more French assaults this turn. This time they've actually entered Albuera, just out in the west here. Some more assaults against, well, this time the King's German Legion, and a very bloody result saw it was a 2 attacker, 3 defender increment loss, which eliminated at one of those King's German Legion battalions. There was a rout result here, and yeah, more French lining up, getting ready. These aren't units, these are just, again, these lost commanders. So we really don't have much left. There's a remnant of the 2nd Division here. They're the only British in Albuera. You have these guys out here, that's stuck. And these guys in square, and then some King's German Legion out here. So basically 4 British battalions left, some skirmishers, these are the Spanish Guards, I think. Yeah, some Spanish Guards out there in square without command. And the French all around the area. This back and forth fire continues between the French and the Portuguese. They've just been bogged down in this fire exchange for such a long time, and I guess the French have caused a few casualties on the Portuguese after that initial Portuguese rush. The French slowly shifted the balance back in their favour. Alright, that's the end of the turn. Okay, so I've just played through these last 2 turns pretty quickly, as there's not a lot happening, just all the fighting around here. The British have 4 battalions left. There's not much else in the rest of the board. Some of their cavalry fire off here too afraid to engage the French cavalry, which vastly outnumbers them at this stage. What is left of the British is very weak, down to just a few increments. It's so hard to pick these old counters up. Yeah, 1 increment there. Those King's German Legion actually haven't been touched yet. These guys are, I think, down to 4, and under here, it's actually a full strength battalion. But they're facing overwhelming numbers of French in the area. French cavalry swarming around Albuera, and as night falls, effectively I think the British command here and those 4 battalions are going to have to surrender. The French are pouring into Albufeira here, more opportunities up there in the west. So calling this battle, I mean, technically, the victory conditions state that the Allies have to hold Albufeira and maintain the British on no higher than morale level 2. Now, they are on morale level 2, but I don't know if they actually hold Albufeira. What does hold Albufeira mean? Their army has been absolutely shattered, and if there were probably just 1 or 2 more turns, what I've been trying to do here is just assault this very stubborn British battalion. Yeah, I'd argue that the French certainly dominate the battlefield, and with their cavalry swarming all around here, there's not much, I mean, that the British can do in these circumstances. If I shift over to look at the casualty chart, you can just see how much that army of the coalition has lost. Just about all the Spanish, a lot of the British. You can see, 1, 2, 3, 4 battalions, and the King's German Legion, and a couple of skirmishes around that area. That is pretty much all that is left on the field. The Portuguese, of course, down in the west, but that's all that's left on the field of that entire army. And the French have lost a lot as well, mainly in those the last 2 turns actually. They had a few battalions down to 1 increment, which were finished off. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 battalions, not counting the grenadiers, which keeps them at morale level 1. Again, most of these units were just routed off the board. These aren't actually battle casualties. Even the same with the British. In those final few turns, they failed a couple of roll to stands, suffered disorder, and then rout results in assaults by the French, and just routed from the field. And with the presence of that Spanish cavalry in the rear, you can see them around here. You can see that doesn't give the British or the Allies a chance to rally. In fact, there were a few cavalry charges against some of those routed units, which just saw them off even further. So once again, the French victorious with their assaults. I mean, you could argue, again, the technicalities that this is technically a British victory, but I really don't think that reflects what's happening here and what has happened. I think this comes down to me. My ability to assault with the French is better than my ability to defend with the British. I did try one sort of more active defence with those second division charges, but it kind of backfired because it kind of stretched my line out a bit too far. And as soon as that French cavalry crossed that Arroyo de Valladolid, I had to pull back very quickly, and that saw that rush back to Albufeira. This fighting around here has been going on for so long. You may recall there was this the Portuguese caught the French off guard initially. They weren't quite well prepared, but they quickly rallied, the French, and the Portuguese tried to maintain momentum by launching a series of assaults against the French, and the French responded by launching a series of counter-assaults, and they demonstrated their superior skill in that regard. But at that point on, I was kind of starved for activations in this area, trying to focus more attention out here in the west for both French and Allied activations. And so it just bogged down into a firefight. And fair to say the French got the upper hand in that, because these Portuguese units only have a fire attack of 4 compared to the French, who are typically 6. They're reduced to 1. 1 there as well. Some of these French are pretty hurting pretty badly. The Portuguese are pretty strong. Four, yeah. Portuguese doing okay down here, I guess. And yeah, again, this is the remnants of Wells. I don't know how to pronounce his name. Wells Brigade around here. And this is Vare's Grenadiers. Only two very weak units remaining up here. One increment there and one increment there. Yeah. So there you go. This is it limited activations in La Bataille de Albuera, and I think it plays pretty quickly. I mean, I had to draw it out because I missed a few nights of playing, but it's a good setting for the battle. You've got a lot of options in terms of where to strike. You've got this nice open ground here, or you've got this more direct route across the Zaroya or the Rio Albuera. I don't know how to fight as the Spanish. Their fire values are terrible, their melee values are terrible, their morale is terrible. So in any situation, they cannot do much. They are cannon fodder. In fact, that's how I used them out here when the British came into line of fire of this French artillery. I moved the Spanish line in front of the British to effectively soak up the French guns, to stop the French guns getting a line of sight on those more valuable British units. I literally used them as French cannon target practice. I don't know what else I should have done with the Spanish. Maybe be more aggressive. Maybe they're better in, if they gain the initiative and they're attacking the French. The Portuguese do pretty well. They have just a little bit better morale, around 34, 35. You can see on the board here, some of these Spanish units have absolutely atrocious morale. 54 here, 46, 46. These guys were good, and the Guards were good at 26 and 31. The Portuguese were better. 35, 36, 34, 35. Most of them with around 33, 34, 35. And of course, the immensely valuable British 22, 21 morale I'm looking at here. So yeah, I'm curious to see how other people play as the Spanish. I've seen a few photos on Consim World of the Allied line stretching west across the Val de Sevilla. Lots of alternatives. Again, I think it's a really nice, interesting setting for a lot of considerations to be made, a lot of options for the French and for the Allies. So there you go, that's the end of La Bataille de Albuera Espagnol by Clash of Arms Games.